Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Let's talk about the lunar eclipse in Taurus, which is a very hot topic, obviously, given that it's actually aligning with the fixed star Algol, which is, I mean, historically, culturally, mythologically, etc., from over 2,000 years ago, there's various versions of the myth, like extending the myth to different sort of layers, different perspectives, and so forth. But overall, it's generally considered to be a very difficult fixed star, one of the worst fixed stars, typically, and therefore has subsequently uh, adopted a very difficult um, perspective relative to its frequency. But I've done a fair bit of revision and reading on it just to kind of get some clear thoughts about it relative to what I'm going to share today. Look, it's not as doom and gloom, as perhaps it's initially suggested through most readings or articles that are available on it, but it is inherently quite a difficult star. But it does have a flip side, and the flip side is that it corresponds to Medusa and Perseus in terms of the mythology. And Perseus ultimately was victorious because he beheaded this monstrous head known as Medusa. So the I mean, I suppose the point to that story is that he was victorious, right? So there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it's an interesting fixed star because it has this way about it where it goes through these periods where it's extremely bright, and then for a certain duration it will dim its light, and when it's at its dimmest point, that's when it's said to be sort of more dangerous, if you like. um I guess given the nature of reality at the moment, it it certainly potentially does speak to some dangerous situations that could arise because there is an incredible amplification at the moment on the earth plane with everything that's going on, particularly through division, segregation, separation, um, people being cast out of society because of certain choices they make, etc. So, the energies are very volatile. The energy on the ether is extremely potent, intense, and volatile. And so when you have such an intense frequency with a fixed star lining up with a lunar eclipse, then it is inevitable that we're going to see perhaps both extremities of this frequency to this fixed star, which, yes, it has a dark side, but through the years, it has actually been better understood as, in fact, not being a dark frequency, but rather it really represents a much lighter frequency and actually amplifies a very powerful degree of light coming through onto the earth plane. But of course, it always comes down to, and that's with any archetype, any astrological alignment you are observing. Now, of course, there's a different thing when you're observing it relative to yourself, and there's a different level going on when you are understanding it from the collective narrative, right, and what's going on. But fundamentally, it comes down to our own level of awareness and consciousness, and therefore how we are going to work with this frequency. It is the most powerful energy coming through this lunar eclipse, which is in Taurus. So we can't deny its presence. It's lined up there for a reason. It's not some random event. So it is very important. And yes, it will bring up some dark shadow material, both on a collective perspective and for us individually. In my book, Magic of the Stars, by Roderick Kingston, who's an Australian fellow who this is his life's work. This is, a book just on the fixed stars. So if you're interested in learning about the fixed stars, I recommend this book. Now, as he talks about it, he just talks about the main sort of characteristics which are largely known through most most articles and mythological writings and so forth. So he just talks about a little bit about the myth, how Medusa and Perseus correspond to this fixed star, Algol or Argol, however you wish to pronounce it. And yes, it does have all these dark sort of characteristics. I mean, basically, it can correspond to, let me just read you a couple of things from this side of it. It can cause misfortune, violence, and illness, accidents. It's known as, to be one of the most destructive stars. It does have an energy that corresponds, though, both to Saturn and Jupiter. And even just that gives us quite a bit of a clue of its potential inherent malefic nature, which would be Saturn, because Saturn is inherently characterized in traditional astrology as a malefic planet. However, Jupiter is a benefic. So we can see that even though it is a dark star called a demon star, as a matter of fact, in terms of the word Algol, which derives its root from the Arabic language, corresponds to being translated into a demon star, right? That's the literal sort of translation. But the fact that it's been ascribed by, ancient sort of teachings and astrologers to having a connection to both Jupiter and Saturn, it immediately tells us that there is, a malefic inherent nature in this star, if that's the energy that's activated, if that's what one is connected to. But there is the benefic side, which is Jupiter. Now, it's interesting because Jupiter is actually forming a square to this lunar eclipse, and that Jupiter becomes extremely important primarily because it is also part of Algol's energy. It corresponds to this fixed star. So there's a very interesting lineup going on here. Pluto is forming a trine, so that's actually very encouraging. But there are a lot of energies here speaking to, well, first of all, the sun is in Scorpio, the moon is going to be in Taurus, that's the full moon, lunar eclipse. It is the beginning of a new nodal cycle that technically begins in January of 2022. And this is really just a kind of a prelude, an introduction. It's the curtain opening up ever so slightly, giving us a little window of perception into really what we're going to be working with over the next 18 months when the nodes transition from Gemini and Sagittarius into Taurus and Scorpio, which occurs January 2022. So there's quite a few layers here. So we have that. And the other thing to consider as well is go back to 18 and a half years ago, when we had the same nodal axis, that is Scorpio and Taurus. The nodal return happens every 18 to 18 and a half years, right? So it's a pretty significant cycle. I was thinking about it just from my own personal life. And, Scorpio Taurus is always going to bring in pretty intense matters in our life around survival, stability, security. Taurus, the biological instincts that correspond to survival, that's what Taurus connects us to. There's the whole relationship side and worth and value and self-worth and so on, because it's a Venus-ruled sign, Taurus. So Venus has this dual nature to her, which we can see both in evolutionary, traditional, and from the point of view of the Venus star point. That is that she rules both Taurus and Libra, so she has this dual nature to her. That's why we see her as a morning star and an evening star, as a continuum of this transition that she makes every 9 months. And so we are also now in the shadow of Venus. That is that Venus is preparing to go into the underworld, to be reborn as a morning star, which takes place in January of 2022. That will be at the 18th degree of Capricorn. It will be conjunct Pluto. So there's a lot of Pluto Scorpio type of energy really opening up, especially given that we recently stepped into Scorpio season. So we step into Scorpio season, we have a new moon in Scorpio. Now we're going to have a partial lunar eclipse in Taurus, which is the polarity to Scorpio. So you can never separate polarities. They're always working together, whether integrated or not. If they're not integrated, then what happens is we are at one end of the spectrum and we just project the polarity. The key to growth, development, and evolution is always about integration, because the more we can integrate, the less we actually project. So we have Taurus Scorpio being highlighted over the next 18 months, which has to do with our very survival Taurus. Now, on a positive, it's also got to do with the ability to withstand the challenges that are presented, the ability to stabilize, to be stable, the ability to ground, to basically get more in touch or more connected to your own inner resources. Because what happens with Taurus is it brings us to this position within ourselves where we understand, in order to survive, we have to figure things out ourselves. We have to figure out, first of all, what our own worth is, what our values are. We have to build things internally and externally, right? And so there's tremendous staying power with Taurus, tremendous stable power, stability, the ability to really be patient and work on things. And of course, the downside to that is we can become too fixated on, beliefs, attitudes, way of life, habits, etc. And it also, because Taurus is actually forming an inconjunct to Libra, which is the other Venus ruled sign, that's not a coincidence. And there's a very specific, how can I put it? Because in life, one of the biggest and most important journeys is relationships, right? And first and foremost, the relationship that we build with ourselves, right? How we nurture that, how we develop that, how we grow within ourselves relative to the relationship we have with ourselves. So what the inconjunct from Taurus to Libra, which is Venus's signs, points to there are times in life where we need to work on ourselves, Taurus, build our own resources, understand our own worth, values, etc., work out what that is for ourselves. And then we have these periods in life where we feel, we need to share our life, right? Libra, with another person. So we get drawn into relationships. The people we draw and attract is very much corresponding to the mirror, the interior of what we have developed in ourselves relative to worth, around love, self-worth, things like that, right? So we go through periods where we've done this building of our own resources, our own understanding of who we are, our needs, things like that, and then we just get propelled into Libra to find a mate to kind of share all that stuff with, right? And what happens when we get into the Libran side of things is that if we get too identified with the other person and the relationship, we can start to lose our own sense of identity, and we just become totally enmeshed in, with the other or the relationship. And then the inconjunct between Taurus and Libra is that process of where once we're in Libra and we've lost ourselves in Libra in the relationship, we get thrown back into Taurus, which is our own self, and we have to basically do some further work, because when we're in the Libran mode and we've lost touch with who we are, then we must get thrown back out of Libra into Taurus to figure out, you know, the needs that we have projected onto Libra, relationship, the other person. We have to figure out how we can meet those needs ourselves, as opposed to having the expectations and projecting all this stuff onto the relationship and the other person. So that's in short, you know, the energy of Taurus to Libra and the inconjunct aspect. That's kind of how it works. The reason this is important is because we have a lunar eclipse in Taurus, which is bringing up all these matters of survival, our instinctual drive and desire to survive everything that is happening in our life at the moment. And because everything in life at the moment is magnified and amplified to the hilt, our survival instincts are going to kick in even more, as a matter of fact, because of these nodes transitioning out of Sagittarius and Gemini into Taurus and Scorpio. And as I said, this lunar eclipse is really a prelude into what we are stepping into relative to the moon's nodes for the next 18 months. And again, go back to 18 years ago and have a think about, if you're old enough, have a think about what was happening in your life at that time. As I was about to say before, I've thought about it from my perspective. My whole life completely changed 18 years ago. You know, I went from living in this country, ending a relationship, leaving a home, leaving the country, migrating to another country, starting a new career, soon later starting a new relationship. You know, my whole world just changed, literally. So I'll be interested to see what happens in my life over the next 18 months. But have a think about it from your own sort of perspective. Now, let's actually bring up some charts. Okay, so for instance, go back to April 2003. That's the last time the nodes were in Taurus Scorpio, as you can see right there. Let me just grab something here. So 2003 in April, that's so remarkable from my perspective in terms of what was happening in my life. So there's the moon's nodes, 29 Scorpio Taurus, and that's literally what we are about to step into in January of 2022. So this is a huge time for us, as a matter of fact. Okay, so let me just get rid of that chart. I just wanted to show you the date so that you don't have to try and figure it out. So that's the date for that. So here's the lunar eclipse chart. Now this is based in Melbourne, Australia, my current location. So obviously, if you want to look at the chart, then base it on your location, wherever that is, in whichever part of the globe you reside. Now, there is the full moon. Again, let me just grab some tools. So 27 degrees of Scorpio Taurus. Okay, there's the sun, there's the moon, exactly opposite each other. That's what creates a full moon. Sun and moon have to be opposite each other. New moon is the sun-moon conjunction. Now, in this case, we have full moons every month, as all of you are aware, but in this case, we have a partial lunar eclipse. So first of all, full moons, we all know that they amplify the astral emotional bodies a great deal. So the emotional content within us gets stirred up, for better or for worse, right? Things that are hidden come to light. You know, the full moon illuminates, for better or for worse, whatever is there within us or outside of ourselves. It always illuminates. Because it's a lunar eclipse, it has that it has an edge to it. You know, it's like a supercharged full moon. Taurus Scorpio is a very challenging polarity in the zodiac. Now, Taurus by its very nature is not really a difficult sign, what challenges Taurus is what sits right opposite it, which is Scorpio, and that's Taurus's shadow. So when Taurus kind of is freaked out by things or by life, it's because it's projecting its opposite, which is Scorpio, and that can bring in things like paranoia, suspicion, uh, non-trusting of things and so forth. So it can activate all those things. Now, this lunar eclipse, as we know, aligns with the fixed star Algol, which, as I've said, is by tradition is known to be the most difficult, nasty fixed star. But again, because of the story relative to Medusa and Perseus ultimately gaining victory by beheading the Medusa, which that story is what corresponds to Algol. And because Algol also has been given the ascribed planets connecting to it as Saturn and Jupiter, through that we also see a malefic and a benefic potential, and it can be both or one or the other. It just depends on the individual, and it depends on the level of evolution we are at on the earth plane and the narrative, the backstory of what's playing out. Now, again, like I said, there's extreme things playing out at the moment. Even though this narrative has reached a different stage, there is still extreme uncertainty, extreme upheaval, extreme chaos and change. Nothing has settled down, really. So, in the location that I'm in, and I won't go on about this too long because most of you don't live here, and some of you are interested, some of you don't care, and that's fine. I understand and I appreciate all positions. But many of you have asked me what's going on in Melbourne because, we have, at the moment, we have had protests every single day for quite some time. And people are asking, well, what are these protests about? And in a very specific way, what they are about in this state, in this country, they relate to a law that's that the premier of this state is trying to have implemented through Parliament. The law corresponds to what's called the pandemic bill, and this pandemic bill, if it gets passed through, it gives all power to one individual to dictate, which that's all he's done for 2 years. He's just dictated and crushed people's lives, essentially. Victoria, Melbourne, Australia, we all know, or maybe some of you don't, but this is the most locked down city in the entire world. And this is connected to the state premier, the person I'm talking about. And so everything that he's done for the last 2 years, he's trying to have a bill passed where he has sole power with emergency laws, pandemic bill, and that will give him the power and authority to enact whatever he wants out of a 42-page bill at any moment, the click of his fingers, and nobody can question him or stop him or whatever. So it's the bill from hell, right? And it's very serious and it's very severe what's going on here, because if it gets passed through, we'd pretty much be mirroring the same laws and procedures that were in play with someone we all know called Hitler. And that's not an exaggeration. This is literally, this is what's being discussed in Parliament from a legal perspective relative to the nature of this bill, and the laws that are stated within it mirror exactly the same laws of that time in history. It's not an exaggeration, it's fact. So there's a lot of distress here at the moment. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of anger. There's, you name it, it's all going on. So it's been really intense here, the energy, to say the least. I really have been struggling to sleep myself. But anyway, we'll see what happens. I'm very curious to see what transpires, particularly because the the discussions in Parliament will come to an end this week, which is basically when the lunar eclipse takes place. It is aligning with Algol, so it can go either way. It can go in a Saturn way or it can go in a Jupiter way. So I can't predict which way it's going to go. I honestly don't know. I'm hoping it's going to go in a Jupiter victorious way through the victory that Perseus had with beheading the Medusa, which would be the literal metaphor and vision of what people in this state, in this country, want to happen to this particular premier, right? And the slogan and chant that's been taking place 24/7 in this state is kill the bill. So anyway, look, there's heaps going on here, but I'll move on from that. I just wanted to kind of let you guys know, because some of you have asked questions around, well, what is this all about? And I just wanted to address it for those of you that are interested. Those of you that are not, you could have just tuned out during that part. Let's go back to the lunar eclipse. Okay, so where's my my mouse? Okay, so there's Jupiter at 24 degrees, which basically forms a T-square, right? It's square the moon, it's square the sun. Now, even though Jupiter is a benefic, the thing that we have to keep in mind here is that because this full moon is lining up with Algol, and the worst, the dark side and the worst side of Algol can certainly be triggered. That's not an impossibility. It's a high possibility. And what's going to amplify that is the fact that Jupiter is squaring this full moon, because even though Jupiter is a benefic, and it's when we look at Jupiter, it usually we link it to faith, optimism, trust, growth, expansion, development, opportunities, blessings, abundance, and all those wonderful things. And it is all those wonderful things. But there is another side to Jupiter that has the side of, totally exaggerating, being totally arrogant and cocky. It has this other side to it, okay? So what can happen here with this lunar eclipse, the darker components that correspond to Algol could very well be totally exaggerated and amplified and exaggerated by Jupiter, right? And so that's the shitty thing about Jupiter being square this full moon, if it goes that way. On the other hand, if it goes more towards the benefic side of Jupiter, but it is a square, and a square is not a trine, and it's not a sextile, and it's not a conjunction. It's a square. Square is conflict, it's dynamic, but it also brings about the necessary change. So a square can essentially bring up really challenging and difficult conditions and situations, but it can also be the very thing that needs to actually turn the wheels in order to get something else activated, right? But Jupiter, with its exaggerated signature that it has, can exaggerate this Algol darker side, if you like. So I'm a little bit concerned about it, but I'm remaining hopeful, because my nature is I'm more of an optimist than a pessimist. That's just how I'm built. So I'm leaning to more towards the benefic side of this. Also because Roderick actually says in this book here, at one stage he says, for the oldest, deepest known layer of archetypal meaning, it now appears Algol is about light, not darkness, or at least it represents light's recurring victory. Now that's a pretty positive statement, think about that. The other thing that I wanted to mention about Algol is that where is that section? Let me just find it. This is really fascinating, especially because Lilith and Ceres are, you know, basically still conjunct the North Node. So we have the presence of two goddess figures. Now, both these goddess figures are pretty challenging goddesses. You know, they don't bring all the sweet stuff, the sugar and the lollies. They bring the dark, confronting and challenging material from our own subconscious, and we have to face the darker sides of ourself. Lilith is also about helping us tune into what makes us feel liberated by being independent and autonomous with the choices that we make and how we express ourselves. And in this case, she's in Gemini, so it is about autonomy through speech, through language, and it's lining up with the lunar eclipse. So that's very interesting. And Ceres, you know, is always about loss and grief, but the flip side to that coin is that she's also about renewal and regeneration, transformation, right? And we have Pluto forming a trine to the lunar eclipse. So that's also an indication of the potential for soul transformation, you know, soul transformative work, because it is a trine. So there's an essence and a sense of assistance. Trines are always assistance, good timing, right timing, you know, things showing up at the right time for you, what people often refer to as, I was really lucky this day. It's not luck, it's that you're in a trine aspect. The trine actually produces a situation and the conditions, everything aligning at the perfect time for you to have this experience where there's no effort needed, there's no struggle needed, rather. It's just an effortless situation that transpires, that assists you, right? Which feels like you had a lucky moment or a lucky day, but it's just a trine. That's what it is. So Pluto, which obviously always corresponds to the soul, in this case, it really corresponds to the collective soul. And of course, it has all these other layers in Capricorn where it's basically destructing every single old patriarchal system that we've ever known. And Capricorn's trying to hang on, you know, still, but, you know, that will continue to be smashed and abolished as time moves forward. But that's other bigger picture stuff. But the fact that Pluto is trying this full moon, I really like that. I think that's going to be very, very helpful. It just depends on how we work with this Algol star. If we get too kind of arrogant and big for our boots, Jupiter, we might just kind of behave in certain ways that, let me just find, there was a sentence here that I wanted to find. Okay. Jupiter square here, square the full moon. Risk of greed, immortality, responsibility, and exaggerated in the destructive and brutal nature of Algol. I really like the way that was worded, so I wanted to bring that up. That's how Jupiter can play out in a more malefic sense with Algol if we approach what's happening in our life at the moment from that kind of level. That is being greedy, you know, being irresponsible and things of that nature, right? Pluto, of course, does help us, you know, tune into, well, it will be more opportunity for release, you know, of whatever we are working with in our life, whatever content we are consciously working with. This is a really powerful opportunity to clear things, because full moons always enable us to clear the emotional body, right? We're clearing things for, we could say, what we've been sort of dealing with the last 6 months. This lunar eclipse enables us to kind of clear that out. And particularly because Pluto's there, it's actually saying you can let go, you can clear this stuff out and get ready to kind of start a new page with the moon's nodes transitioning into Taurus and Scorpio, which happens just in a couple of months' time. Here's what I wanted to say. Roderick actually says that one of the issues with Algol, or one of the themes rather, not issue, well, I suppose it can be an issue, but it's a theme more than anything else, It actually corresponds to facing the wounded feminine and the darker elements of the psyche, especially those relegated to the subconscious. Now, you don't often, well, you may or you may not, but I haven't really come across that exact wording before until I looked at his book. And that shows us that Algol has it has a real, Scorpio, Taurus, Pluto, Venus energy to it, right? The the fact that he talks about facing the wounded feminine, that's a very important statement, because the wounded feminine, which has been projected and oppressed and suppressed as well simultaneously in different ways, this is actually saying to us that this lunar eclipse, which a lunar eclipse, again, full moon, enabling us to clear things out from the last 6 months, Pluto trining, saying this is a chance to face deeper shadow subconscious material that can be triggered at this time. But the triggering that takes place, it doesn't have to be destructive. It can be really positive, because it can actually help us get in touch with traumas from the past, associated feelings and memories that we have with past traumas that we can actually clear up at this point in time, particularly because of the wounded feminine shadow material that's implied with the work of Algol, right? So there's very powerful symbols and signatures emanating from this full moon eclipse on so many different levels. And I'm just giving, a general overview of a few different layers. In some ways it's not general, in some ways it's more specific, in some ways it's a little bit deeper, but basically it's a rounded level of information from a few different levels that you can consider for yourself what resonates, what speaks to you. And certainly by actually having a look at where this full moon lands in your chart, it's going to be very important, because the nodes, as you can see, they are in Gemini and Sag, right, at 1 degrees, which is why we've got this lunar eclipse to begin with. The nodes always need to be near the sun and the moon, right, when you're having a solar or lunar eclipse. And because they are really right at the end of their cycle in Gemini and Sagittarius, which we've had virtually for the last 16 months or so, their transition into Taurus and Scorpio, which takes place January 2022, really look at where Taurus and Scorpio is in your chart, because those houses are going to be completely activated for the next 18 months. And again, to get a clue and an insight into what this might mean, although it will be different because you are not who you were 18 years ago, 18 and a half years ago. I mean, in essence, your soul is your soul. It is who you are. But your life experiences over the last 18 and a half years have helped you evolve and develop in a number of different ways, right? That's what life is about, experience, so that we can evolve and grow and develop. So if you think about what happened 18 years ago when the nodes were back in Scorpio Taurus, it's going to give you a clue of just how important this transition is in those signs, okay? So look at it from the point of view of the houses that it was in. I mean, for me, like I said before, my whole life changed. Now, those nodes take place in my 4th and my 10th. That's why my whole life changed. I was uprooted. I went to a completely different country, and I went into a completely different career, and, left a relationship, left my family, I left everything. So just think about where these transiting nodes will be in your birth chart. It's going to give you a lot to work with from the point of view of what you're going to be doing over the next 18 months. It's a really big deal. The other thing that's really interesting as well, of course, is that the nodes transitioning into Taurus and Scorpio. Well, Taurus is a Venus ruled sign, and Venus is really prominent at the moment because she's where is she here? She's basically just gone past her shadow period, right, which was at 11 degrees of Capricorn. So she's slowing down, right? Slowing down to ultimately catch up with the sun, which she will in January. But she will form a conjunction to Pluto, right? Then she'll go back to about 18 degrees of Capricorn with the Sun Venus conjunction, retrograde Venus, that's the morning star. So here we have Venus going through a powerful metamorphosis, the journey of the underworld. When she goes retrograde, she disappears. She goes into the underworld for 40 days or thereabouts, 40 days, 40 nights. And so she's going to be transformed into the morning star, right? So we have this journey that's the energy of this, we could say, is already activated, right? Particularly since Venus has already passed her shadow stage, right? Venus is the ruler of this lunar eclipse. That's an important thing to connect with. Venus is the ruler of the North Node in Taurus, which will be activated in January of next year. So Venus plays a pretty big part in this lunar eclipse and in these nodes that are transitioning into Scorpio Taurus starting January 2022. And so when you break that down, you're bringing in, again, like I said earlier, it's a very, Taurus, Scorpio, Venus, Pluto energies, which speak to what? They speak to survival, Taurus, in just pure, simple, getting to the core and essence, survival, Taurus, and Scorpio. Scorpio invites us into the dimension where once we have built our own inner resources and strengths and stabilities and values and whatnot, we can become totally fixed and remain on that level and not step outside of that, because we've created this secure and safe fortress, Taurus, around us. And the polarity, which is Scorpio to Taurus, always invites us to open ourselves up to other ways, other possibilities. It takes us out of our comfort zone, Taurus, and dives us into the depths of the underworld, Scorpio, so that we can have a variety of different types of experiences and basically evolve further and transform. By sharing our life with others, we actually transform, because what happens is we are confronted with our own personal limitations. So there's a very powerful personal and collective transformative journey that's going to be the story line, if you like, over the next 18 months with the moon's nodes. And this lunar eclipse is the introduction, the entry into all of that. So very, very powerful lunar eclipse, to say the least, lining up with Algol, which can be victorious, but can be incredibly destructive, depending on our own level of awareness and how we tune into this energy. Again, like I said, Jupiter is a benefic and it may assist, but it may also be the one that exaggerates the worst of the things that are going on. So it really speaks to, it needs to speak to how we feel, what we stand in, what we are prepared to do. And one other thing I came across that I read, and I've just forgotten how the exact sentence. That's what it was. Because Algol can potentially have this victorious side, which also tunes into very powerful light codes that are being transmitted into the earth plane through this lunar eclipse. If we're going to get the best result out of this lunar eclipse with Algol lining up together, the best result and the victorious outcome, which is definitely possible. Also, what we need to keep in mind with that is because of the pretty severe malefic nature of Algol, the victorious spectrum of it means that we're not going to get to the benefic and victorious side without actually facing any obstacles. There's going to be some pretty challenging obstacles along the way, and we're going to have to really be able to focus our energy on really wanting to work through those obstacles, whatever they are for you, whatever they are for me, etc. Right? They're different for each of us, but the point is that to enact the victorious side of Algol, we've got to work through the obstacles and challenges that are going to present, and they're very real, and they will present. That's just the nature of this energy. But if you can work through it with honesty and faith, and here's the other thing that is important to remember about Algol as well, because Algol has this dark, demon sort of side to it. It has a tendency to bring up because it connects to the subconscious, suppressed feminine stuff as well, and then the feminine being distorted and projected in demonized ways and whatnot, such as the archetype of Lilith, who's completely demonized, for instance. Because it has all that associated to it, I've just lost my point there. It'll come back to me. It'll just have to come back. I've completely just lost that thought. Let me see if I can find something here. Had a brain freeze. Okay. I think, yeah, it's not coming back to me very clearly, to be honest, but I think really what I was trying to suggest is that if we can't work with the obstacles and the challenges, we might be more inclined to be sort of hammered by the Algol, nastiness of what this energy can bring up. That's what I was going to say. Thank you. It brings up a lot of fear, okay, through the subconscious, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually not a bad thing, because it's a real opportunity, the alignment of this lunar eclipse, to work with our deep or deepest subconscious fears, because it brings them up. And the way to work through them, it is said, with the alignment of Algol, is to have faith, belief, and trust in what? In divine source creation to all things, of course, and yourself. So it's going to be a real testament to each of us in terms of how much faith and trust and belief do we really have in ourself and in the divine source creation to all things. That's what this is going to, that's really the backbone of it. And that's what's going to determine, if you like, which way this is going to go for us on an individual level. Now, on a collective level, it's very different, because even though we are all subject to the same narrative, there are different levels and faces and phases to that based on where you are located on the earth plane. There are different things going on in the US, there are different things going on in Europe, there are different things going on in Australia, and then you've got every single state. So clearly I can't I can't speak on, all those possibilities relative to each state in each country. I'd be here for weeks if I did that, and I'd have to have done a hell of a lot of research from the point of view of law and things like that. So it's just interesting to know, though, that these are the potential energies that are there. Nothing is about good or bad, right or wrong, and dark or light. We like to bring in the dual nature of life. That's what brings in light and dark. The fact that we live in a world of duality. So we have this perception and identification of this is light and this is dark. What's Carl Jung's quote where he says, enlightenment is not achieved by imagining light figures or the light, as it were. That's not what's going to get us there. Because the minute we tune into identifying with the light, and not understanding the shadow and the dark side, we project the dark side. That's where the problem lies in the consciousness of humanity. It's this idea of I'm light and I'm going to be the light. And so what have you done with your darkness? If you haven't integrated it, you've just projected it. And so you're going to see the demon out there. You're going to see the bad out there. That's what this is all about. It's really about integration, you know, integration, soul integration, consciousness awareness. So it's understanding that yes, there is this sort of energy and essence and experience of dark and light because we live in a world of duality, but that's almost just one layer. You know, when we start exploring deeper pathways into the landscape of our soul and use our intuition and develop a greater sense of consciousness and understanding about our circumstances in our life and everything that's going on in the world, when we learn to integrate, we are far less likely to project this dual nature, but rather we just remain more of an observer, and we don't take a position of light or dark because we understand that we are both made up of both. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. Simple as that. So, summary: powerful lunar eclipse, bringing up matters of fear and survival and challenging us to have enormous trust and faith and belief, and recognizing that we must work through certain obstacles and challenges and not see it as not feeling sort of a sense of defeat. This is too hard. No, we have to work through it. We have to work with whatever presents for us individually. We have to find that inner sort of self-endurance and strength and stability, Taurus, and face our own dark shit, Scorpio. And understand that it's not out there, it's in us. That's what this is kind of bringing up. And again, as I said, I love Pluto being trine this moon because that really supports and facilitates our personal, emotional lunar eclipse, and soul Pluto transformations as well. And, you know, the nodes finally, again, preparing us into this lunar eclipse is preparing us for what the nodes are going to bring to us for the next 18 months. And one of those nodes is a Venus ruled sign. So this, I think perhaps one of the key points with that as well would be that whilst it is about survival and release and rebirth, transformations and all those things, Taurus, Scorpio, the shadow components of this dual nature and how much we, you know, project our own stuff onto the world, others, etc. It is also at a higher level, I guess we could say, at a deeper, heartfelt level, because it's a Venus ruled sign. It's got to do with love, I guess, because it's a Venus ruled sign, right? And Venus is the goddess of love. And I guess we could say the more love we can have for ourselves, the more love we will actually have for humanity. You know, the more we have complexes and difficulties and dislikes about ourselves and unconscious stuff and just things that we project and you know, anger that we hold on to, you know, Mars, right, all that sort of stuff, the more we are likely to see that, you know, happening all around us in the story of our life and the story of the world. But the more we can love ourselves, the more we can love humanity and the world at large. That's what Venus gifts us to integrate and understand. And she gives us this opportunity to metamorphosize and transform these inner landscapes of the soul of our heart, Venus. Every time she goes retrograde and goes into the underworld, she takes all these. I'll go through this with Ariel anyway, so I don't want to go too much into it. But she transforms because, well, first of all, she's nearly killed in the underworld, and she has to remove all her garments. And there's very symbolic meaning to that myth, which is basically the myth of Inanna. Anyway, look, I'll talk about that with Ariel. So I'll leave it there because I'm going off into a different stream there. Let me see, was there anything else that I needed to say? I don't think so. I think that pretty much covers my transmission for today. I hope it was useful, interesting. Leave your comments and questions below. Let me know how you are all doing. And yeah, I'll see. In fact, perhaps, no, I probably will come back before then. I will, as I said, I'm sitting with Ariel on the 7th of December. That will be, it won't be live, but it will be uploaded on that day. So you can look out for that video on the 7th of December. That's still a couple of weeks away. So I'll be back before then with some further astrological transmissions. Sending you all much love and much blessings, and look forward to seeing you very soon. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks. Bye.